Welcome to the ISA Conference Rewind series. I am Tanisha Price, instructional designer at the International Society of Arboriculture. Today, ISA is happy to bring you Reaching Up, New Techniques for Reaching Tree Canopy Goals, featuring Jessica Sanders. This presentation was originally given at the 2020 ISA Virtual Conference, and the views and information expressed are those of the presenter. Now, sit back and enjoy the video.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jess Sanders. I'm the Director of Science and Policy at Casey Trees, and I wanted to share some new strategies and programs that we created to branch out of our usual tree connections and enhance our canopy. The examples that you'll see today involve participation and work of many different people who worked at Casey Trees from 2010 to this year in 2020. So thanks for watching today. Feel free to grab a coffee or anything else to drink, maybe some popcorn or a snack, and join us. We'd all love to be in person, but for now, at least you can enjoy us from the comfort of your own couch. So we'll be talking about reaching up, new techniques for reaching tree canopy goals. So first, I want to give you some context on DC. Much of our infrastructure was built in about 1790. You can see here, this is an image of that time, and we have trees, specifically elms, leading up to the Capitol. It has very wide sidewalks. We have a streetcar at that time, and really just thinking about what this city looked like, right? So how did it end up this way? President George Washington chose a plot at the confluence of two rivers to be the capital of our new nation. Alexandria and Georgetown were already booming port towns. They weren't actually included in the original boundaries of the district. But the idea was that DC needed a federal center for government buildings. So Washington chose a very famous French architect of the time named Pierre L'Enfant to design the city. Pulling from his intimate knowledge of great capital cities in Europe, L'Enfant designed DC in a very similar fashion with broad avenues radiating from the central capital here. So you can see these broad avenues going out, right? Both George Washington and L'Enfant appreciated the need to incorporate trees in the cityscape. Therefore, the L'Enfant Plan, drafted in 1791, reserved space in the public right-of-way exclusively for trees. Also, with the creation of these wide avenues, you'll see that when they intersect with other areas, you end up with little pocket parks, and that was part of the plan as well. Our city has had a history of planning for trees. There are many other great planners that have influenced this: Banneker, Macmillan, Olmsted, and modern day Harriet Tregoning. This is great because we don't have to retrofit our cities to make room for trees like some other cities do. We can start to incorporate them in our public space now. But just like other cities, our urban forests face some serious challenges. Looking at this picture, you can notice the big difference between 1973 with all of its green and 1997 with all of its dark black. The dark black is representing areas that lost tree canopy. So this article was published in the Washington Post in 1999, and it showed some areas of the city had lost more than 60% of tree canopy. I want you to keep in mind that the technology used in these images were taken is not the same as it is today. So the actual amount of tree canopy lost is definitely not as black and white, but overall the takeaway is pretty clear. The number of trees within the district was decreasing. One woman, Mrs. Betty Brown Casey, was so troubled by this article that she decided to do something about it. Mrs. Casey wasn't an inherent tree lover, but she said, "My husband Eugene loved trees and I loved Eugene. So through the transitive property, she loved trees," right? So the Garden Club of America, Mrs. Casey decides to start a nonprofit in response to that. And the nonprofit is why I'm here today. It's Casey Trees. So Casey Trees has a clear mission dedicated to restoring, enhancing, and protecting the tree canopy of the nation's capital. These trees in the capital don't appear overnight. We are stewards not only from the past to today, but for the next generation. Many of our streets are lined with beautiful mature trees that have taken 30 or more years to reach full potential of making our city both livable and lovable. Case in point is this street right here. You can see outlined in a heart of tree canopy is the National Cathedral. You can see these beautiful mature oaks lining the street, and despite their beauty and countless benefits, our trees still face a number of challenges. This is where our volunteers come in. So we build and engage the community using volunteers, and we use them in a multitude of ways. They show up rain, shine, sleet, snow, any way to plant trees at community tree plantings. They take classes, they advocate, they prune, they inventory trees, they engage in tree care. They just are a true lover of trees. They are our bread and butter. And if you are involved in nonprofit, you know volunteers are what get you through the day and make sure we get our work done. And volunteers are wonderful. But you have to think about not everyone can volunteer. That isn't something that everyone has time for. It's not something that interests everyone. So what we're left with is this problem of how do we increase our canopy spread? How do we increase tree knowledge? And how do we cultivate a long-lasting impact in our community? And that's what we're going to focus on today, is not the volunteer aspect, but that other aspect. So the first question I often pose to people when they ask what I do is, do you want the district to be a gray city or a green city? And I try to show them examples and we talk it through. And the overwhelming response to this is that they want the green when they're shown the options. So DC residents want this city to be green, but they have to think of competing priorities in their own lives, in their own communities. And we also have to consider the government and how are they involved, both the local and the federal government involved here. So the district is growing. It is currently growing and is expected to continue to grow. We're seeing this growth in new buildings, new cranes, constructions, and we're expected to close in on 1 million people by 2045. So while our changing urban landscape means accommodating for developments, it also means ensuring that there are green spaces for all residents. Our green spaces make our lives and city better. They provide numerous benefits, including refuge, relaxation, fostering connections to nature and community, cooling our homes and streets, and cleaning water that flows into our 2 rivers. Without these cherished green spaces, DC loses the vibrancy that attracts these people to live and work within it. So all of this development has and growth has potential consequences, right? On this map, the dark blue represents pieces of property that are covered 100% by impervious surfaces. So you can see on the left is 1984, and you can see on the right is 2010. You can see the blue is darker and more intense. More of the city is covered in sidewalks or asphalt. And you can also see the surrounding area has more asphalt and impervious surfaces in it. What that means is that you get other consequences, right? You have stormwater issues. You know, we had a lot of storms this summer and we had 100-year floods happen. We had people whose homes who never were considered in a flood zone were actually underwater. So this is the concept of what are the consequences of growth and development if we're not really thinking about the natural aspect. Besides that, we all talk about urban heat island effect, right? We know that these impervious surfaces make it hotter during the day. Our cities don't get as cool during the night. And if we're not thinking about trees and using them as buffers, we're not thinking about our residents. We have people that are under heat stress and vulnerability that are either old or young, and maybe they don't have access to air conditioners. So how do we use nature's air conditioner of trees to really help mitigate that? So we know development and growth are going to happen. We know that there's a whole website that talks about how many cranes are over the district today. We need policies to ensure that we have green growth and smart development. And we need to think about the concept of, do we fight for every individual tree that development impacts? Like this tree in this tree pit right here, which it clearly is in a highly landscaped area. These are very expensive slate tiles. This is a very expensive development, but the trees in the pit, there's already crap inside that pit. This tree is not going to survive. We're not thinking about this individual tree. But But we also have to think about the canopy over time. How do we push forward so that we're not just fighting battles with developers on every individual tree, but we're thinking about these wars, these long-lasting greenscapes that have the potential to improve people's lives and create, passive recreation among the trees. So we really want to think about this as forward thinking because we know it's so hard to get retrofits. So we want trees in the forefront of our minds to start. With all of this, we can think about how do we measure progress, right? So arborists measure progress by our canopy cover. So DC has a 40% canopy goal by 2032, and we're currently at 38%. And it's a collective impact, right? Not only is it Casey Trees, but we also have our city. Our city arborists are the #1 tree planters in our district, and we want to value them and get them awarded. This is a great infographic for the general public, but really when we talk to arborists, we're really thinking about what does that look like? What does tree canopy distribution look like throughout the city? Is it equitable? Where are places to plant more? So the thing to think about is how do we reach these canopy goals with the ever-changing landscape, not only with development, but with population coming in as well. So we want to think about trees and nature as central aspects to plans and policy initiatives. By incorporating these trees and embedding them in these plans and policies, we can ensure that trees are thought of in terms of a holistic solution, in terms of climate, resiliency, Vision Zero, a sustainable DC initiative. Our state forester, Earl Utzler, refers to trees as the original green infrastructure, and I cannot agree with him more on this. Trees are doing so many things. They're the original multitaskers, right? They're cleaning our air, they're cleaning our water, they're getting all of that stormwater out of the system, and we need to make sure that others are aware of it, not just our arborists. So by engaging with city leaders about issues impacting DC trees, we can turn these targets into allies, and we can ensure that trees are considered throughout the city, not just by your municipal foresters, but by your planners, by your public works department, by everyone, right? That you're really thinking about trees throughout the city. Because sustainable cities need trees. So we need to focus on how to retain trees. But the most important underlying principle remains that trees do in fact make up the forest, but the dominant species of our urban forest is humans. So we can't forget the human aspect to our trees. So with this, we started to consider people in the trees, and now we have a new problem. How do we weave in our current policies? How do we target non-tree people? How do we create programs or products that engage to them to achieve and enhance our goals? So I'm going to talk today about 3 big programs to reach non-traditional audiences. The 3 that I'm going to talk about is how we work and cultivate developers. I know they're usually seen as the big bad evil wolf, but that's not how we're working with them. How we conserve land through our land conservation program, and how we think about trees on structures. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is working with developers to increase green. So as a background, from 2005 to 2015, DC gained about 77,000 new residents, but only about 13,000 new housing units. If you look at the housing stock throughout DC, especially the affordable housing stock, it's unfairly distributed and it's concentrated in certain areas. And the demand for housing has placed a lot of undue pressure on low-income families. And the mayor actually put this call out, and she said, we're called on to think big and differently about how we deliver more units in our cities. So I want you to think back to our tree canopy goal of 40% by 2032. And then I want you to think about developments, especially affordable housing developments. Sometimes these pit against each other because you want to maximize the number of units, and maybe in order to maximize the number of units, you go lot line to lot line and you have no space for green, no space for trees, no space for that beautiful amenity of nature that's provided. We actually saw this in the past year with a development called Sursum Corda. They promised a number of units and that were in conflict with the preservation of 8 heritage trees, which in DC are legally protected large trees. You cannot remove these trees if they are healthy. However, the developer decided to just cut them down and pay the fine for this unlawful removal rather than look into the long-term preservation and moving where the trees are. So the thought was to the developer that it's easier to remove the existing landscape elements than incorporate anything into the plan. So what happened with this is that you really raised and started to pit two things against each other. The tree people who say, you know, trees are a pivotal part to being in a city. You need these in order to create a livable city, to have all of these plans and policies. And then you have this affordable housing mandate. So you're pitting these two things against each other. And it's really easy when you think about housing and you think about trees, trees will always lose. We will never win that battle because we have to think about the humans. So we need to think holistically about how to have trees and affordable housing. We need to market to make sure that trees are considered as a critical part of affordable housing, not just pit these two against each other. So we sat down and thought about it for a while, and we had been working with developers, but we started to pitch 3 big ideas and wrap all of our asks around one thing. The idea of biophilic design, bringing the outdoors in, creating living walls and green terrace patios. E.O. Wilson is the person who coined biophilia. It's this concept that humans possess an innate tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life. Many developments and buildings degrade nature and alienate it from us. So how do we get nature as part of it? The second concept is to limit disturbance with existing natural features. Shelter living spaces with canopy trees really work to preserve canopy that's there and enhance it for the long-term future. And then the third point that we work with is planting trees on rooftops and terraces, shading the surrounding streets. So we work with developers to greenify their plans, to meet goals and to inspire greater ones. We use the carrot rather than the stick approach to be successful here. We call them, we establish a timeline of how can we work together, how do we look at their plans and incorporate these elements to make sure that not only are they greener, but they're more marketable because people want to live there. So a great example of this in the district is the So Others May Eat building. It's the Conway Center on Benning Road. It has 202 units of affordable housing. Trees are not only on the streets in this public right of way and near the building, but they're seen on the rooftop, right? There are aspects of nature throughout this entire development, and they're really thought of bringing trees and nature as a part of the development process. So this, in order to get buildings like this, you really have to work and have communications, and you can't shame people into doing this. That doesn't work. You have to have honest, transparent conversations and understand that you have to meet the people where they are. You have to align your goal with theirs. So our next program, there's not additional land in the district. We're not adding more land the way we add more trees. So we have to think strategically about how to preserve what little land is left for the long-term benefit of the entire city. And that's where our next program comes in. And I really think that it's inspired by this quote by the executive director of Casey Trees, Mark Bustano. He says, one of the best things we can do to preserve tree canopy is to preserve soil. And that's really the fundamental idea behind the next program, which is land conservation. So we work with landholders to create green spaces forever, in perpetuity. So this isn't a 10-year program, this is a forever program. And we do that through 4 big buckets. Conservation easements, actually going and purchasing tax sales, a straight out fee simple purchase, and purchasing development rights for a parcel so that someone else can't build on it. And the whole purpose of this is to think about the long-term aspect of a parcel. So you'll notice these 3 parcels on your right are all currently, on your left, are all currently in conservation easements. And this is great. You may notice that they're not a forested parcel. They're not 100% canopy. We have a little park here. We have a parcel of land that's adjacent to a bus stop. And then this is a small fruit tree parcel. It's about 750 square feet. And what we're thinking about this is the long-term ability, right? The long-term ability of those parcels to have trees and to contribute canopy. So this was a great program that we actually partnered with the DC Department of Housing and Community Development in their Vacant to Vibrant program. So they used that Vacant to Vibrant program to sell off district-owned parcels for affordable and workforce development housing that developers bought in. And then they also said, we have some parcels that aren't really developable. How could we make those vibrant? So they entered in long-term conservation easements with Casey Trees to make sure that those trees, that area will be protected forever. So when we think about land conservation, we want to think about the prioritization of different areas. I think with land conservation, it's easy to say, oh, someone wants a conservation easement, they'll just get one. This chart up here is to show you that there's a very long process. It can sometimes take years from the time someone says, I'm interested in a conservation easement until we actually get that parcel protected. So we prioritize areas for conservation easement if they're adjacent to a current green space. If there's nowhere where in your space where this park would be so valued, the available soil potential. Can you plant trees on there for the long term? Can that increase the canopy? How do we plant trees on there in long term? And then the ecological and conservation impact. So we currently have 5 easements and 1 actual purchased land. And you can see that they're spread out through the district, and they're not necessarily in the greenest areas of the district, right? These parcels are valuable because they can create community spaces for people to work in. So that brings us to our last program that I'm going to talk about. And it's this concept of inspiring tree people and non-tree people. And the concept is trees on structure. So I know some of you may be looking at these pictures and saying, those just look like trees on roofs, and you would be right. The problem with that concept is that when you think trees on roofs, you think to look up. But in DC, a lot of the trees on structure are actually at grade, meaning that you wouldn't know that they were on a structure or on a roof unless you knew what was underground. Much of the National Mall is actually on top of a highway. So those are really important things to consider with terms and language, right? And trees on structure isn't a new concept. You can think the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, China has some, Japan has some, Italy, Germany, right? We have all of these different areas that have them, and they're beautiful, they're inspirational. They help us to think about things in a different way. And so at Casey Trees, we wanted to see if we could highlight these examples that exist in DC in a very creative way. We wanted to highlight them through, rather than a book or a pamphlet, to actually put them in a coffee table book. And that may seem non-traditional to, arborists. We're tree people. Why do we want a coffee table book? Because non-tree people don't respond well to pamphlets. So the concept of marketing this was to how do we increase our capacity, our knowledge base? How do we inspire other people? Because at the end of the day, trees are doing amazing things all around us. We just need to notice. This is a pretty big highway that goes through the center of DC, and this is the US Tax Court. And here are these beautiful, majestic trees that are growing above this disgusting highway with all of its pollution, right? But you would never notice it if you don't look up. So for a broader audience, we created these gorgeous layouts, easy to read descriptions that highlight all of these different projects that talk about why it's there. They're accessible to anyone that's interested in DC. It's marketed to anyone who's interested in DC to just be a beautiful book that you can put out on your coffee table. And when we were developing it, we were thinking about what developers, policymakers, real estate agents, what all of those people have in their waiting rooms. We wanted them to think about these topics, and for a client to pick up this book while they're waiting and take a gander and be inspired. We wanted to create an inspirational product and a demand for someone to ask for their next product. Well, why don't we have a tree on a roof? We can see all of these different examples. Why couldn't we do that? We wanted to spark some awe and wonder when we created this. So we made it accessible for all audiences, right? Besides the layouts of every single project, we also have what trees are there, and we have them highlighted here in a matrix to show what trees exist on what project, so you can start to talk about them throughout. We collected all of this data with the help of the designers and the people who manage those projects. The tax court goes back to 1951, so that project has been there a while. We want to make sure that we're paying homage to everyone who worked on these, and that the pictures and then the inspiration are inspiring others to continue that. We took these beautiful pictures and layouts of the trees that exist there, both with what Casey Trees would recommend and in terms of small, medium, and large trees, and then also what other trees exist there. We also then knew that we would have a more technical audience that would read this. So we started to think about, well, how do we express what's going on? How do you support the trees on the structure? What's the irrigation, the wind, the soil, the support? It is, for this audience, it is important to understand that DC is a very short city. Most of our buildings are 12 stories or under, so we are not dealing with the same amount of wind and whipping potential that perhaps in New York City would be determining with. So we started to incorporate, what do all of these projects have in common? What are they thinking about with irrigation and soil space and support for these projects? Features interviews with all of the designers and the maintenance people. And then also, why did people choose the different trees that they chose? What was the inspiration for the plant palette? The biggest thing to consider with all of this is that trees are doing amazing things all around us. This is the Kennedy Center, looks out on the beautiful Potomac River, and here are these gorgeous willows, right? And once again, people are driving under the Kennedy Center and never really realizing they're driving under those trees as well. So it's really important to recognize these trees are doing amazing things, and how do we connect the people to the trees? So in general, the messaging is of the utmost importance for the general public. We need to recognize that there's a diverse amount of community within cities, and we need to meet the people where they are and listen to them, listen to what they want, market to what they want. The cherry trees are throughout DC, not only in the Cherry Blossom Festival area, which is, this tidal basin pink, but they're all over DC. So let's allow people to interact and engage with them in a different way. This park right here is actually fully on structure. How neat. How about we start advertising and talking to it? And even right here, we call this the Tree Box Rodeo. And this is just kids that were playing in their tree box. And, there's a tree back here, but they had decided that this was an extension of their home, right? They created this whole feature with army men and horses and wagons, and it's just great. But you need to stop and look around as arborists if we want to engage people in this message and in this long-term growth of Canopy. So thank you so much for participating today, for sitting and listening. I feel free to reach out if you have any questions or if you want to engage more in learning about any of these programs. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining.